part 5, page number 38, The Enemy book, Vistas. As for Sadao, every day he examined the wound carefully. The last stitches had been pulled out this morning, and the young man would in a fortnight be nearly as well as ever. Sadao went back to his office and carefully typed a letter to the chief of police reporting the whole matter. On the 21st day of February, an escaped prisoner was washed up on the shore in front of my house. So far he typed, and then he opened a secret drawer of his desk and put the unfinished report into it. So he wrote a report to the chief of police reporting everything, whatever had happened. On the 7th day after that, two things happened. In the morning, the servants left together, their belongings tied in large square cotton kerchiefs. When Hannah got up in the morning, nothing was done, the house not cleaned and the food not prepared. And she knew what it meant. She was dismayed and even terrified, but her pride as a mistress would not allow her to show it. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully when they appeared before her in the kitchen, and she paid them off and thanked them for all that they had done for her. They were crying, but she did not cry. The cook and the gardener had served Sadao since he was a little boy in his father's house, and Yumi cried because of the children. She was so grieving that after she had gone, she ran back to Hannah. If the baby misses me too much tonight, send for me. I am going to my own house, and you know where it is. Thank you, Hannah said, smiling, but she told herself she would not send for Yumi. However, the baby cried. She was so firm and she was so determined that she is going to handle everything all alone. She held her pride. She made the breakfast and Sadao helped with the children. Neither of them spoke of the servants beyond the fact that they were gone. But after Hannah had taken morning food to the prisoner, she came back to Sadao. Why is it we cannot eat clearly what we ought to do? She asked him. Even the servants see more clearly than we do. Why are we different from other Japanese? Sadao did not answer, but a little later he went into the room where the prisoner was and said brusquely, "Today, you may get up on your feet. I want you to stay up only 5 minutes at a time. Tomorrow you may try twice as long. It would be well that you get back your strength as quickly as possible." So Sadao tries to make sure that the enemy could be able to walk. He can stand on his own feet. He can walk. He saw the flicker of terror on the young face that was still very pale. "Okay," the boy murmured. Evidently, he was determined to say more. "I feel I ought to thank you, doctor, for having saved my life." "Don't thank me too early," Sadao said coldly. He saw the flicker of terror again in the boy's eyes. Terror as unmistakable as an animal's. The scars on his neck were crimson for a moment. Those scars, what were they? Sadao did not ask. Even he did not ask for the scars, how he got the scars and all. He is not at all, so much being friendly with the enemy. Rather, he is doing his job. He is telling him, he is just instructing him that you must do this, you must do that to get well soon. And the enemy wants to thank him for saving his life, but he is very much cold. He doesn't care what the enemy is saying. Rather, he is saying that don't thank me so early. Don't think that I am so much generous that I may not, forgive you. I may not, exactly save your life. In the afternoon, the second thing happened. Hannah, working hard on unaccustomed labor, saw a messenger come to the door in official uniform. Her hands were weak and she could not draw her breath. The servants must have told already. She ran to Sadao, gasping, unable to utter a word. But by then the messenger had simply followed her through the garden, and there he stood. She pointed at him helplessly. Sadao looked up from his book. He was in his office, the other partition of which was thrown open to the garden for the southern sunshine. What is it? He asked the messenger, and then he rose, seeing the man's uniform. You are to come to the palace, the man said. The old general is in pain again. Oh, Hannah breathed. Is that all? All, the messenger exclaimed. Is it not enough? Indeed it is, she replied. I am very sorry. When Sadao came to say goodbye, she was in the kitchen but doing nothing. The children were asleep and she sat merely resting for a moment, more exhausted from her fright than her work. Very, interesting that she was more frightful that what will happen because her husband has been called by the general. What is the matter? She doesn't know exactly. Next page, page number 40. I thought they had come to arrest you, she said. He gazed down into her anxious eyes. I must get rid of this man for your sake, he said in distress. Somehow I must get rid of him. Thou goes to see the general. Of course, the general said weakly. I understand fully, but that is because I once took a degree in Princeton. So few Japanese have. I care nothing for the man, Excellency, Sadao said. But having operated on him with such successes, yes, the general said, it only makes me feel you more indispensable to me. Evidently, you can save anyone. You are so skilled. You say you think I can stand on more such attack as I have had today. Not more than once, Sadao said. Then certainly, I can allow nothing to happen to you, the general said with anxiety. His long, pale Japanese face became expressionless, which meant that he was in deep thought. You cannot be arrested, the general said, closing his eyes. Suppose you were condemned to death and the next day I had to have my operation? There are other surgeons, Excellency, Sadao suggested. None, I trust, the general replied. The best ones have been trained by Germans and would consider the operation successful even if I die. I do not care for their point of view, he sighed. It seems a pity that we cannot better combine their German ruthlessness with the American sentimentality. Then you could turn your prisoner over to execution, and yet I could be sure you would not murder me while I was unconscious. So the general is very much conscious about his health, that he is very much sure that Sadao will definitely not kill him, and if he is arrested, who is going to operate him? So he is very much conscious about his health. And the general laughed. He had an unusual sense of humor. As a Japanese, could you not combine these two foreign elements, he asked. Sadao smiled. I am not quite sure, he said. But for your sake, I would be willing to try, Excellency. The general shook his head. I had rather not be the test case, he said. He felt suddenly weak and overwhelmed with the cares of his life as an official in times such as these, when repeated victory brought great responsibilities all over the South Pacific. It is very unfortunate that this man should have washed up on your doorstep, he said irritably. I feel it so myself, Sadao said gently. It would be best if he could be quietly killed, the general said. Not by you, but by someone who does not know him. I have my own private assassins. Suppose I send 2 of them to your house tonight, or better, any night. You need know nothing about it. It is now warm. What would be more natural than that you should leave the outer partition of the white man's room open to the garden while he sleeps? So that means general gave one suggestion that he can kill the enemy by his 2 private assassins, so that the blame will not come to Sadao. and people would think that he has left and the enemy will be killed. So their purpose will be solved. Certainly, it would be very natural, Sadao agreed. In fact, it is so left open every night. Good, the general said, warning. They are very capable assassins. They make no noise and they know the trick of inward bleeding. If you like, I can even have them remove the body. Sadao considered. That perhaps would be best, Excellency, he agreed, thinking of Hannah. He left the general's presence then and went home, thinking over the plan. In this way, the whole thing would be taken out of his hands. He would tell Hannah nothing, since she would be timid at this idea of assassins in the house, and yet certainly such persons were essential in an absolute state such as Japan was. How else could rulers deal with those who supposed them? He refused to allow anything but reason to be the atmosphere of his mind as he went into the room where the American was in bed. But as he opened the door, to his surprise, he found the young man out of bed and preparing to go into the garden. "What is this?" he exclaimed. "Who gave you permission to leave your room?" "I am not using to waiting for permission," Tom said gaily. "Gosh, I feel pretty good again, but will the muscles on this side always feel stiff?" So here, when the plan was made by Sadao and the general, Sadao came home, and when he saw the man he got up and he's standing out which door has to be opened for the private assassins to come, and he said that yes, get into the bed. So let's see, there is a little hot talk between between Tom and or the enemy and Sadao. "Is it so?" Sadao inquired, surprised. He got all else. "Now I thought I have provided against that," he murmured. He lifted the edge of the man's shirt and gazed at the healing scar. "Massage may do it," he said, "if exercise does not." "It won't bother me much," the young man said. His young face was gaunt under the sturdily blond beard. "Say, doctor, I have got something I want to say to you. If I hadn't met a Jap like you, well, I wouldn't be alive today. I know that." Stow bowed, but he could not speak. "Sure, I know that," Tom went on warmly. His big thin hands gripping a chair were white at the cudgel. "I guess if all the Japs were like you, there wouldn't have been a war." So the young prisoner of war, the enemy, is saying these words. "Perhaps," Sadao said with difficulty, "and now I think you had better go back to bed." He helped the boy back into the bed and then bowed. "Good night," he said. Sadao slept badly that night. Time and time again he woke, thinking he heard the rustling of footsteps, the sound of a twig broken or a stone displaced in the garden, a noise such as men might make who carried a burden. The next morning he made the excuse to go first into the guest room if the American were gone. He then could simply tell Hannah that so the general had directed. But when he opened the door, he saw at once that there on the pillow was a shaggy blonde head. He could hear the peaceful breathing of sleep. And he closed the door again quietly. "He is asleep," he told Hannah. "He is almost well to sleep like that." "What shall we do with him?" Hannah whispered her old refrain. Sadao shook his head. "I must decide in a day or two," he promised. But certainly he thought the second night must be the night. There rose a wind that night, and he listened to the sounds of bending bows and whistling partitions. Hannah woke too. "Ought we not to go and choose the stick man's partition?" he said. "No," Sadao said. "It is able now to do it for himself." So as the door was open, it was making sound by the wind. Hannah thought of closing the door, but Sadao said no, let the door be open. If it is open, if it is disturbing, he can close it by himself. The second day also the assassins did not come. No, Sadao said he is able now to do it for himself. But the next morning the American was still there. Then the third night, of course, must be the night the wind changed to quiet rain and the garden was full of the sound of dripping eaves and running springs. Sadao slept a little better, but he woke at the sound of a crash and leaped to his feet. What was that? Hannah cried. The baby woke at her voice and began to wail. I must go and see. But he held her and would not let her move. Sadao, she cried, what is the matter with you? Don't go, he muttered, don't go. His terror infected her and she stood breathless, waiting. There was only silence. Together they crept back into the bed, the baby between them. Yet when he opened the door of the guest room in the morning, there was a young man. He was very gay and had already washed and was now on his feet. He had asked for a razor yesterday and had shaved himself, and today there was a faint color in his cheeks.